Welcome to Women of a Certain Stage, the podcast redefining how we think about menopause. I'm your host, Lauren Churin, a passionate advocate for breaking the stigma and empowering individuals to navigate this transformational stage of life with confidence and clarity. Here, we're diving into a new era of menopause support, featuring expert advice, real-life stories, and actionable insights. Whether you're curious about building your personal menopause plan or you're looking to make an impact, you're in the right place. Let's embrace the change together. Fiona, I am so excited about speaking to you today. I learned about you and your charity because I met Vikram Talaulikar. Dr. Vikram delivers sessions on my menopause coach diploma and helps my students all over the world make sure they're staying current, factual, up-to-date, research-led, which is an absolute tenet of everything that I do here at Women of a Certain Stage. But I'm conscious this is our first real opportunity to have a conversation. So just to scene set, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself and let people know a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, as you can tell from my accent, I'm Australian. I am a journalist. My degree is in anatomy and physiology, but then I went into mainstream publishing. And then when my son was around about 4, after about 20 years in that, I was running the equivalent of BBC's Newsnight. I thought, I can't do these hours anymore. So I went back to the two things that I love are politics and health. So I went to medical publishing and have spent about 20 years or so in that. Ended up coming here after a stint in Moscow and started a thing that was sort of designed to give women evidence-based information on health in general and skin. But within a very, very, very short period of time, I found myself only talking menopause. And through COVID, that just grew. And every night I'd be interviewing menopause experts. And we'd get to a certain point in the conversation where I'd say, what do we know about the evidence for this? And they'd say, well, we don't really because the studies haven't been done. And that started to really frustrate me. So I got to a point where I went to Vikram and Diane Danzebrink, who has been a menopause advocate and campaigner for far longer than she would probably want to think about, and said, listen, I think we should start a charity to try and raise money for this research, because if we don't, nobody else is going to do it. So about 18 months ago, we started and we got our charity, or actually a little bit more now, about 2 years ago we started, and about 18 months ago we got our charity status. And so our aim is to support menopause research and make sure that we give evidence-based education to all those who need it. Healthcare professionals, those who support people going through menopause, and menopausal women. And then out of that, watching the landscape change over the last, 8 to 9 years or so, what started as a very collegiate group has really fractured. And it made me start to think, what does this menopause landscape say about women's health in general? So I took a step back and thought, okay, how have we come to this point where we actually have doctors openly arguing with each other on social media? We have a growing distrust in the system and the establishment. We have a sort of a love of the menopausal influencer. I hate the word influencer, but given that is the nomenclature of the day, I will stick with it. I hate it when somebody calls me an influencer. So I thought, okay, what does all of that mean in terms of women's health in general? Because, we are under-resourced, underfunded, under-researched, and we live 25% longer in chronic illness than men do later in life. So that's how I came up with the Meno Wars.
Meno Wars.
Yes, yeah. having a sort of a good look at where we're at and what it actually means, because it has, I think menopause in many ways is a sort of microcosm of women's health in general, and we're not getting it right. And because of that, we are, literally spending, 10, 15 years in poor health later on, and that could be rectified if we had good studies, good money, good research, and good advocacy.
Yeah, and alignment. Alignment would be really helpful, because I think I don't think you and I both know that it is the misinformation, disinformation, the lack of science-backed and research-based information that is causing so much conflict and confusion. And even for people that do come to training days or go on courses or get qualified, they could go to one person and get one set of information and then walk away feeling really confident, really able to go out and help and support, to educate, help others. And then read other stuff from people who are in the medical profession, who we were brought up in a decade or a couple of decades where we looked up to, revered our doctors, what the man in the white coat said, what the person in the white coat said, stuck. We didn't challenge our doctors. We didn't question what they told us. And now we're at the other, the other side of the spectrum where we're constantly challenging, constantly questioning, and getting different truths from different people, because what they tell us is their truth at that given moment in time. And yet it just is this huge chaos. I think Meno Wars is just the perfect title in terms of describing what's going on at the moment. So when you decided to take that step back and create the book, what was your initial objective or goal when you started out in the journey, and how did it change as you were going through that?
Interesting, good question, because I think actually in many ways menopause is just one of those things in a woman's life, again, where everybody has an opinion from the moment we're born to the moment we die about what it is we should do with our bodies, like abortion, weight, pregnancy, who you should marry, should you have a cesarean section, should you have an abortion, should you be on the pill. Everybody's got an opinion about what it is that we do. And in the end, what I wanted people to take away from it was that, you're an active participant in your health. Your health and your decisions are yours and yours alone. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. This is between you and your doctor and your individual health risk. You make decisions for you, and you deserve the best. So listen to what's good for you, and don't worry about what everybody else is saying. If you want to have HRT, if you don't want to have HRT, your choice. Your choice, your individual choice. So these are the things that I wanted people to take away, because there's so much, oh, what's wrong with you, you snowdrop? We've been going through menopause for, snowflake. We've been going through menopause since the day dot. What's wrong with you? And then there's the other side that is sort of basically like, oh my God, if you don't take HRT today, you're going to end up in a wheelchair, demented and incontinent before, with your bones literally crumbling before your eyes. So we've got these two polarized sorts of views, but there are 1,000,001 ways to go through menopause. So there are 1,000,001 ways that you can choose for yourself. So I think it's bringing home that message of it's about you, not anybody else.
Yeah. And I think two things came up to me there. One was the fact that how often do we actually go to see our doctors with the intention of making an informed decision rather than being told what we should do? And that, for me, I think is the crux of making sure that people are set up for a successful conversation, and they understand that they are there to make an informed choice. They're not there to be told what to do. So how do we change that?
I don't think it's necessarily they're going in and not wanting to make one, but I think that they're probably not well enough informed to even know that they are part of that discussion. And that's the difficulty. And there's a section at the end of the book about how you can advocate for yourself. And I think it is being prepared. Using one of those symptom trackers if you want to, whether it's paper, whether it's an app, whether it's downloading one from a website, whatever, but having it clearly set out that these are the symptoms that I'm experiencing, this is how it's affecting me, and this is how long it's affected me for. So you can actually give a very quick picture of what you're going through, and I think that would make an awful lot of difference. And then being aware of the options, at least, you don't have to necessarily go in and say, I want Sandrina and I want a Mirena coil, or whichever one you feel like, but just, to actually go in there and say, what are my options? I've heard that there are these things. Which ones do you think are the most appropriate for me, given my health background? So you can actually be part of that discussion. I guess the difficulty then comes is if your GP knows nothing about it, hasn't been educated on it, and says things like, well, I don't believe in HRT, then we're in a difficult situation. Then it comes down to having a conversation about, well, who in your practice does, where can you refer me to, and also making sure that we get GPs educated.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
And now healthcare assistants. We are going to have to get those healthcare assistants done, because they're going to be the ones that are doing these 40-plus healthcare checks, and they've had zero education. So unless we manage to get them educated, we're really in trouble.
Yeah, and I think that the whole topic of the 40-plus healthcare checks is an interesting one, because as someone who's nearly, coming up for 60, 20 years post-menopausal, not on HRT, I've never had a healthcare check.
Me either.
So anything, right? And two of us both know better than not to make sure that we have those checks and balances. Smears, mammograms, yes, but my GP surgery is send in your BP. So once a year, I get a text message saying, please, can you supply us with your blood pressure? And that's it.
Well,
That is
that's
it.
better than mine.
And
I had to argue with mine, as I think I outlined it in the book actually, because, my father had a stroke, my grandfather had a stroke, my uncle had a stroke. Two of them died. My father was incapacitated for 15 years. My blood pressure was very high for a long period of time, even on medication. And I remember I was sitting here, and it was during COVID again, and I thought, I just don't feel right. I feel quite dizzy. I took my blood pressure, it was up to like 160 on 100 or something like that. And I thought, this is not good. So I said to my husband, you know what, I'm going to go up to the hospital. I know this is a bit melodramatic, but I'm going to go because I just don't feel right. And so by the time I got there, I was talking to the girl at the desk, and I said, I feel really dizzy. I'm going to pass out. So they raced me around to sit in a different waiting room instead of the waiting room with everybody else. So I was sitting there and I burst into tears, and I had a panic attack, and I have rosacea. So when I have rosacea, my face goes redder than this. And it also does that the butterfly with the very bright red nose. So it looks like I've drunk 15 bottles of red wine. So by the time they came around to get me, I was still looking like that. And the whole time I was in there, even though my blood pressure went up to 185 over 120, the whole conversation was about how much alcohol I drank. And I left with a prescription for thiamine and no advice on blood pressure at all. It was extraordinary. But yeah, so, and then, I had
and that
argued with my
thiamine
GP.
without bloods and without any checks.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was extraordinary.
Wow.
It was. I actually said to the very nice nurse, who was a woman of colour next to me, saying, "I know you're not going to believe this coming from a white middle class woman, but I think I'm being discriminated against based on the colour of my skin at this particular moment." And she just laughed and sort of looked at me and said, "Well, welcome to my world." And I thought, wow, if this is how people get treated, and it is just not good. It's no wonder we end up with heart attacks and doing worse and all of those sorts of things. It was not good. But even after that, I had to argue with my GP for 2 years to get an extra, to get my candesartan increased and have something actually added to it to bring it to blood pressure that was under control, because they were still going on old guidelines. Anything around 140 on 90 is fine. And I'm going, well, mine's normally 155 on 90. And I don't think that is fine given my family history. It took me a very long time. So you do actually have to be able to advocate for yourself.
That's, I look at some of the elderly relatives in my life, and, the prescription lists, a couple of them I'm power of attorney for, both their health and everything else. And I have their prescription list. I have all their, different things, and I've gone through them and I've had them assessed. And actually there's so much contradiction from the same doctor that's prescribing for an individual situation and not looking at the knock-on consequences of that drug on another drug. And a couple of them, we've had them completely reassessed from start all the way through, because
those medicine reviews are really important. Yeah,
they're fundamental. And in one case, I had a relative who had been incontinent for a long period of time, very badly, and when she got her medication properly sorted out, she was able to leave the house and go out and get back to a much more normal life, just because she hadn't had a medicine review. And I just think it's disgusting that in this day and age that's happening. But I remember the thing that I was going to say when I said the two things. So the other thing I was saying was, because we have this conflict, I always say to people that think about that older woman in their 80s or maybe 90s who's never touched HRT, who's still living independently, doing her gardening, getting her shopping, and is completely with it. And then think about the older woman who's in her 80s or 90s, who's been on HRT and is living independently. Because what we have to look at is who is in society and who is living well and who is healthy. And I know they're not necessarily the majority, but in either case, to be honest. And I think that's where you're right. We're missing that research. But what is your if someone said to me, what's a book to read for X, what would the three key things about menopause, would I be listening out for someone saying, I want to read a book on this? What would you say the kind of key things, that the key three messages are that come out of your book?
I think it is one of the main ones. I think is it. Pauline Mackey puts it very nicely in the section on dementia, because we're often told that HRT is going to be to prevent your dementia. So she's gone through all of the research. She says, well, actually, at the moment, the best we can hope for is really neutral. But what's important about what she says is 100% of us go through menopause. 20% or so of us will end up with dementia. 19% or so of men will end up with dementia. Women actually get diagnosed more often with dementia in their 80s. So it's a little bit later than men. Men are late 70s and women are in their early 80s. So the question is what makes that 20% or so of us vulnerable? And then so basically what she's looking at then is saying, okay, estrogen is one part of the problem, but what it is probably the untreated vasomotor symptoms, the people who are having those night sweats and hot flushes that's interfering with their sleep, untreated or poorly treated high blood pressure, untreated or poorly treated cholesterol, and sleep apnea. So basically we've got this group of things that are causing what she says are hyper intensities in the brain, and these are the women who they now believe are much more vulnerable. So yes, HRT is important for them, because you've got to get either a non-hormonal, some of the newer ones, if you can't take HRT, that get the vasomotor symptoms under control, because they're the things that they're the ones that make us vulnerable. And same with the bones too. So for me, it's about finding the people who really would benefit. Because as she says with dementia, if you want to prevent one case of dementia now, you have to treat 2,004 women. So that's 2,003 people who, if they're taking it thinking that they've got primary prevention of dementia, have been taking it for no good outcome. Osteoporosis is the other one. So if you're coming into Mike McClung is a brilliant guy on this. He worked with the WHO on the FRAC score, which is the score that gives us your fragility risk, your fracture risk. And he was basically saying we have to think about this in a really different way. We've got to identify the women who are coming into menopause, the couple of years before menopause and a couple of years after, where you risk losing up to 20% of your bone density. So we've got to find those women. And if they're coming in with a low score already, they're the ones that we have to target for treatment, whether that be HRT or whether it be the other anti-resorptive drugs, depending on where they're at. And I know that they get a lot of bad press, but apparently the injections that you have every 5 years now have much lower side effects than the oral ones that gave people a lot of problems. So there are options there as well. So to me, it's about if you've got bothersome symptoms, and I hate that word bothersome, and I can't believe that I'm even saying it myself. But if you have symptoms that impact upon your quality of life and you feel that you wish to have them treated, then get them done. But if you are at specific risk of those sorts of things, then make sure you're talking to the doctor and getting the treatment that is appropriate for you.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And I'm really fascinated. So my background, I trained in psychology and then later became personal trainer, sports therapy, nutritional advisor, also with qualifications in anatomy and physiology and mental health. So I'm now a coach and a mentor as well. And that's why I train people to become a menopause coach with lots of experts to make sure they are being kept current and up to date. But one of the things I'm really curious about personally, and this is why I love your charity, and I'd love to talk about that a little bit more as well, is I would like to see what the intersectionality between lifestyle. So what I'm big on is the fact that women do live longer in poor health, and that is potentially something that we can do something about. And that would just make such a massive difference to our economy, to how we live our lives, to absolutely everything. And all of this, I'm teaching you to suck eggs. But, when we are in our 20s and 30s, if we're eating well, training well, or, at least exercising and moving, whatever training means to an individual, and we're eating nourishing, good quality, best quality food we can afford to buy, watching our alcohol and caffeine intake, watching our red meat intake, perhaps, maybe, I don't know, there's mixed research. And then also if we're doing lots of impact exercise and strength work in our 20s and 30s as we're setting ourselves up as we get into that perimenopausal phase, or I became menopausal at 37. So for me, it was a little bit earlier. But what impact does that have vis-a-vis our DNA, our genes? Because some of the research I've read shows that, or is alluding to the fact that, our genetics our genetic disposition will impact the way that we absorb and use and benefit from different medications. So I don't know a lot about it. It's not my area of expertise, but it's just something I'm finding really fascinating going forward. And I'm just curious about, do you have any lean between the lifestyle factors and the DNA genetic factors, or do you think it's just all up in the mix at the moment?
I think that we are heading towards a really interesting phase of much more individualized care with the whole genetics thing. The more we understand about that and the interaction between lifestyle and those kinds of things. But I think at the moment there are a lot of. I mean, I'm really, really pleased that the International Menopause Society has made this year's theme lifestyle, because, as they say, there's no amount of HRT is going to make up for a bad lifestyle. And even things like the dementia itself. I mean, the Lancet has that list of modifiable risk factors, and they say that we could probably or possibly prevent up to 50% of dementia cases if we practice some good self-care, really, exercising regularly, eating well, as you said, not smoking, not drinking too much, getting your hearing checked if you're going deaf, getting your eyesight checked, because they're the things that make you become more sort of socially isolated.
Yeah.
All of those kinds of things can make a sort of real difference to our health. When it comes to bones, the thing that really sort of worries me is that if the next generation, really, if they're sitting all day on these smartphones and on their laptops and not doing the, I don't know about you, but my parents were cruel. They made me walk to school over a kilometre and a half from about the age of 4. So yes, I kind of worry about the next generation, because our bone mineral density peaks in our late teens, early 20s. So while it's great to start thinking about it as we're coming into perimenopause, if we're starting off low back then we're really in trouble. We've got to get out there and really sort of absorb some resistance into our bones and do some work, because otherwise we're just going to end up the next generation will be way worse off than we are.
Yeah, and I remember one of the key things when I was training as a health coach was exactly that. The calcium deposits that you lay down in your first decade and a half is really setting you up for your later life. And it's just, as I moved into learning and studying menopause, it then became really obvious just how important that was. So totally concur. So where do you see things heading at the moment? Because I'm feeling very excited about the fact that there is more money going into research, and also terrified about the conflicts that I'm seeing in this space, and the fact that it is, you've written about it, I've written about it in terms of, Meno washing, Meno Wars, Meno, whatever you want to call it. There is just so much conflict. And every single week I get a product company, or a bed linen company, or a pajama company, or a supplement company, or a gummy company getting in touch saying, we've got the solution for, and I'm like, no, you really haven't. But tell me about your product. Because I don't partner with product companies at all, and I never have, because I'm too small of an organization to do the due diligence, to look at the efficacy, to spend time checking their research and all of that, to be able to go, yes, actually, this is something that I could put my name behind. But where do you see things moving as we're going forward in the short term?
In terms of commercialization, I think we've only just started to see it. I think that this is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. As the book says, in the US, the 50 plus age group itself just generally is a $15 trillion market. They're saying that menopause itself is about a $600 billion market. So I just think we've only just seen the tip of it. So I think that we need regulations. We need much tighter control on the claims that people are making. And we also, especially for intimate products, I mean, my God, the things that people are putting out with the ingredients in them that you wouldn't put them on your face. So why the hell would you want them anywhere near your vagina? We need a lot more regulation on that kind of stuff. So I can't see that getting better in the short term, although I do think there is a bit of a backlash swelling against the whole sort of M-tick and those kinds of things. Come to a supermarket aisle near you. I mean, when a toothpaste appears on there, you kind of look. There's absolutely no difference between that Colgate toothpaste and the Oral-B in the aisle next door. So seriously. So I think there's a bit of a backlash brewing there. In terms of research, I'm actually deeply worried. I think America is the powerhouse of research, and at the moment, the way they're going in terms of carving up the research centres and the centres for disease control and those kinds of things, and the money being taken away from it, I can't see women doing well out of this. I mean, they almost killed the WHI, the Women's Health Initiative, which, even though it was controversial, is still the longest running and possibly most important study that we've had of women's health and menopause. So I'm actually deeply worried about where that goes, and I think we have to really be proactively looking to make sure that we can make sure that women are still. Well, when I say still, I mean we're barely represented. We're lucky if we make up 40% of a cohort of people in a research study. In conditions that we're more likely to suffer from. And that's just extraordinary. And so I just kind of think, and if you're black or you're Asian, well, I mean, you don't even really get a look in. So we've got a really long way to go. And what I really hope will happen here...
No, you carry on. What you really hope will happen here?
I launched a petition last year which didn't get very far, so I'm relaunching it again now, and that is to ask the government not for new money, but just to make sure that the money that they do allocate to the NIHR, which does the research here, that a reasonable percentage of it is actually allocated for menopause research, because since 1993 to January this year, they've done over 8,000 studies. Just 33%, it's not even 33%, sorry, just 33 studies mention the word menopause. Just 33. And the amount of funding is 0.3% that they've allocated towards it. So if we really want change, we have to really up that amount of funding to make sure that vast amounts of research well, not even vast amounts, but just some good research can be done. I don't think people realise how expensive research is. Good research takes, 3 to 4 years, if you're lucky, maybe even 10 years, and it can cost millions. So we need to make sure that there is enough money there to get that sort of research done. So that's what I'm pushing for now. That's going to be my big campaign for the next 12 months. Let's get that done. Ring fence that funding.
I will be right behind you on that, as we talked about just before we began the podcast. And I think it's quite interesting because I work with different people in different departments in UCL. And one of the things I said to them, they came up with some great research ideas that were very aligned with the top priorities that we've been talking about more broadly. And just to get an initial project off the ground, we were talking quite a substantial 6-figure sum. And it was... and that was for 1 year, and that was just like a few hours a week from 3 people. And it was okay. And that was just to get the idea together, to get it scoped out. And people just don't understand what it takes to go in to make that happen. So tell me about your charity. Tell me about the very specific goals and aims. How are you choosing to, or how are you hoping to raise money for it? And how are you choosing the projects and research papers that you want to get behind?
Well, as yet, we're not even in the position to be able to do that. So what we're hoping to do is, once we actually get enough money, is that people will send us their research idea. It will go through a peer review system like everybody else's would, and those that are deemed to have a reasonable effect or to be worthwhile will get some funding. But at the moment, we're having difficulty ourselves actually raising money. It's not easy to get money out of people. In fact, it's very hard. Yes, so any ideas I'm open to.
I know. And running a charity takes time, effort, energy. There's a lot of commitment to set up a charity. There's a lot of commitment to continue to run it. There's a lot of obligations. I don't think people realise just how big of a a deal it is to both set it
There's
up,
a
get through all
lot
the
of
paperwork.
governance to actually get it, to get that
Yeah.
charity status is an awful lot of paperwork, and a lot of governance and a lot of things that you have to make sure that you actually abide by, so you're not sort of taking people's money and disappearing off to the Bahamas. You've got to be. It's an effort, I've got to say. And then
Yeah.
to actually, I mean, I guess if you're holding up something, you're going, here are children who don't have clean water. Here's, we're looking for a cure for cancer or whatever it is. It's even they struggle to make money. But if you're saying this is about menopause, it's a kind of a harder sell because, again, we have that political bias of like, well, you've gone through it for years. What do you need this for? But I think we need to reframe the thinking on it and actually thinking, menopause does have a considerable effect on your blood pressure, your triglycerides, your cholesterol, your bones, all of those sorts of things that cost the economy. I hate the fact that we have to phrase everything in an economic cost all the time, but it costs the economy an awful lot to have us in ill health. Not to mention, that those of us who do choose to leave work or reduce our hours or take a lower paying job or all of those sorts of things that therefore mean that we're not contributing in the economy the same way either. So in many ways, we need to start thinking about it in terms of looking at what is the impact of menopause on long-term health, what is the impact of menopause on the economy, and then thinking, actually, yeah, it does make a difference. We've got to do something about this.
So I would just like to put a shout out to any of my clients who are listening to this, or any of my prospective clients who are listening to this, especially if you're a corporate organization who does contribute towards a charity every year. I would love to put this charity on your radar because, as you know, it's going to cost the global economy, it's going to cost the UK economy, whichever country you're listening in. And I know we're in over 50 countries around the world now. At the end of the day, it's costing your business money. It's costing you in presenteeism. It's costing you in your inability to attract people to come and work with you because you're not being seen as menopause supportive. It's costing you in people that are taking long-term, short-term time off. And those long-term sickness people can't be backfilled. So the stress is going to back up on all the people that they're working with. In every single way, shape, and form, I can help you model what that looks like and what the cost of your organization is. And next year, when menopause action plans come in place, you will have to start thinking about how you contribute towards your action plans and what you're going to be saying. And although it's only voluntary next year, it will be mandatory in 2027. So,
and not looking at it as a liability because, keeping the people that you've all spent, years training and putting in jobs is really important to you. And I don't know if you saw the study that came out the other day about peak brain function, but basically the 55 to 60-year-olds, they're the ones whose brain is at its peak for emotional intelligence, for moral and ethical reasoning, for all of these sorts of things. So you don't want to get rid of them. Just because they're having a difficulty, remembering where they put their glasses or their keys doesn't mean they can't do their job.
Exactly. And the great thing is that we actually want to be in work. We want to work. We just need to make sure that we can adapt the environment and get the help and support. And the reality is, as we've seen over the last 12 years since I've been running Women of a Certain Stage, is that the organizations that are doing the work, that are making the culture change and doing more than a tick box exercise, are actually having more of the women stepping up and asking for the help and support early. And so they're not being disadvantaged in the workplace. So we know this works. So Fiona, what's the best way to be able to look up the charity, to learn about it, to read about it, and give consideration to raising funds for it?
Oh, brilliant. So the website is mref.uk, so very easy, very short. And the email is hello@mref.uk, so you can find us there. We're on social media, we're on Instagram and Facebook and all of those sorts of things. I need to update the LinkedIn, but so it's just me at the moment on the LinkedIn, but you can find me there. So please get in touch. And I think actually one of the really interesting things that I've discovered out of doing a lot of these lately is that in the book there's a woman called Mud who documents how she was having a difficult time at work, and then she finally worked up the courage to go and talk to her line manager and HR about it. And the line manager looked at her and said, "Well, are you going to be able to reach your KPIs?" And so her instant reaction was not a good one. And she ended up quitting. And I've heard this a number of times over recent periods, and spoke to a friend of mine the other day who's sort of in HR, and she said, well, you know, what often happens, because this is just a dreadful thing to say to somebody, you've got to reach your KPIs when they come in. She said, but what often happens is women will come in there and they don't want to say they're having difficulty. They're obviously distressed, and she'll sort of look at them and say, well, you're obviously here for a reason, so what is it? So they can't quite articulate because they don't want to be seen as being incompetent. So, and then they'll say, okay, well, you can't really tell us what's wrong, but what do you want us to do? And then they don't know what it is that they want.
Yeah.
So we need line managers and HR people who are trained in actually being able to say, okay, we understand that you're having temporary difficulties at this moment. These are some of the options that you might like to try, or we can make available for you, or signpost you to places where you could get the help or the resources you need, whether, you know, it's CBT for anxiety or CBT for insomnia, or you know, whatever it is that's the requirement, then, you know, that would probably be a lot better than. I mean, I understand it. I've managed people. If somebody were coming to me and going, I can't do my job at the moment, I'm falling apart and everything, the first thing I'm going to be thinking is, oh my God, how am I going to manage to, you know, fill this magazine or this news program or whatever it is that I'm relying on this person to do. So I'm thinking my head's on the block, so I can understand it. And I'm thinking, how am I going to get through this world? Who am I going to drag in to replace them with? But in the end, you know, employers have a responsibility to their employees, and without giving them support, then they're just not, you know, they're shooting themselves in the foot, really.
I agree wholeheartedly.
I'm assuming you would, actually.
Funnily enough, I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you, Fiona, and I'm sure we could probably dive into a lot more topics that might be even edgier than some of the stuff that we've touched on today. But for now, I'm going to say thank you so much for your time, and perhaps you might be open to a part 2 in a few months' time to let me know where you've gone and what you've done next. That would be amazing. Fiona,
I'll be there with Christmas bells on.
Yes, amazing. Thank you so much for your time, and let's carry on speaking again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on Women of a Certain Stage. I hope today's episode inspired you to think differently about menopause and the incredible opportunities this stage of life brings. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with 3 friends who need to hear this message. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps us reach even more people. You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Lauren Turin, or visit our website at womenofacertainstage.com to learn more about menopause coaching, inspiring events, and corporate training. Until next time, let's continue making a difference, one conversation at a time.